Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi, everyone. Today we are talking with Dr. Kirsten Traynor. Kirsten is a research associate at Arizona State University and the editor of 2 Million Blossoms, a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting our pollinators. Hi, Dr. Traynor. Welcome to Backyard Ecology, and thank you for talking with us today.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I'm excited because we met last year. Can't believe it's been a year, but it was at the fall meeting of the Ohio State Beekeepers Association, and you were just about ready to launch your new magazine, 2 Million Blossoms.
Yes, I appreciated you manning the table since they had me giving a whole slew of talks at that event. That vendor help at tables is always much appreciated, and that's correct. I was in the process of putting the first issue together. We have made it successfully through our first year of publishing all 4 issues. The 4th one's been shipping to our early all of our subscribers. And we're hard at work on the winter issue that'll be shipping in January already. So I have made it through 2020 despite a pandemic, and our subscriber numbers keep growing, which is very exciting.
That is exciting. Yes, I've loved reading your magazine. I'm still working on the last issue. A little bit here, a little bit there, but yeah, all the articles I've read, I've really enjoyed, and really looking forward to next year.
So thank you. Yeah, we have a really amazing cover planned for the January issue. It's a hand-drawn piece of art. An illustrator in France made it off a photograph that Jake Mosher had done of 2 bees on a flower. So it's really beautiful. It's actually going to be all black and white, so no color for once. But I think it'll be very visually arresting.
Nice. So before we talk much more about the magazine, which is what we really want to talk a lot about, but tell us a little bit about your story and how you got into pollinators and all that good stuff, because you've got a pretty interesting story from what I've heard.
Yes, I sort of fell into this industry. And after college, I was living on a farm. And the first experience I had was I wanted honey. And so we met a beekeeper, and this beekeeper agreed to put 5 hives on the property. And he invited me out to take a look at the colonies and gave me a veil. And the colonies had built wild comb between 2 frames of foundation. And so he gave me a taste of this spring honey, and it was still warm from the hive. It was black locust honey. Since we had a lot of black locusts along the streams there, and it just erupted in my mouth with this lemon citrusy explosion of flavor, and I had never had anything like that before. He then came back a few weeks later, and he stole his hives back. I mean, they were his, so it was his right, in the middle of the night, and drove off with them without letting me know. And the reason was, after he'd given me this taste of honey, he looked into the brood nest and he pulls out an envelope and starts sprinkling white powder into the colony. And I started asking, I think, a few too many questions. The bees obviously had American foul brood, and he was treating them with terramycin. And he didn't want, it's a reportable disease, and he didn't want to be caught and reported to the apiary inspector. And so me and my curiosity, just wanting to know what's going on, I guess he decided that I was a little too curious for his own good. And so the colonies disappeared in the middle of the night. But I was already planting wildflowers, and I really wanted pollinators for my wildflower garden. And so I signed up for a beekeeping short course, an introductory class to beekeeping. And during that class, I ended up winning a hive in a raffle, the styrofoam Bee Max hive, not the bees, just the box. But once you have a box, it's just sitting there. You have to fill it with bees. And as every beekeeper knows, you never want to start with just 1 colony. So I ended up starting with 3 nukes that year. 3 nukes turned into 20 within about 2.5 years, 3 years. And then on a whim, I applied for a German Chancellor Fellowship from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation to study the differences between European and American beekeeping. This is an award given to 10 young leaders in their field every year from the United States, from Russia, and the year I participated for the first time from China as well. And I still don't know why, but they gave it to me. And so I got to spend 18 months based in Germany and working at the Institute of Bee Research in Celle, just north of Hanover. And during that time, I traveled about 50,000 miles by car, meeting with beekeepers, bee breeders, and bee scientists into some very remote corners of both Germany and the rest of Western Europe. And I got absolutely hooked. And I wanted to keep doing this. And so I decided to go to graduate school, thinking that my independent project and graduate school would be very, very similar. And for anybody who's ever done a PhD in research, this is, of course, total folly. You don't get to hop in a car and travel all around the country asking people questions, although that would be a really interesting way of doing a PhD. But luckily, I got Rob Page at Arizona State University to take a chance on an English major. And so I ended up earning my PhD in bee biology, looking at how bees communicate via pheromones.
So how did you switch over make that transition from just honeybees into all pollinators?
That's an excellent question. And I think what happens is, as a beekeeper, you're working your colonies and you start noticing what the bees are bringing in. And in my case, I wanted to help the bees out. So I put in a 7-acre meadow on this farm that I was living on at the time. And the first year I added in 80 pounds of sunflower seed, just bird food. And the whole field erupted up in this gorgeous sunflowers. And it was so beautiful that people would stop driving along the road to take pictures. And I really thought my honeybees would appreciate this large bonanza of flowers I had put in for them. And of course they ignored it. They completely ignored it. But I was walking through the field every day because it was just so stunning. And I would see all these bumblebees, and then I was starting to try and identify them. And some of them were quite unusual bumblebees that we don't see very often. And then I was seeing sweat bees and solitary bees, and all these crickets and monarch butterflies started showing up. So I think honeybees are really sort of that gateway bug that introduce a lot of people into how interconnected our ecosystem services are. And so I love honeybees. I love working with them. But if I'm actually honest, the other bees are a lot cooler. I can't admit that too loudly since I work with honeybees. Honeybees are awesome. I love working them. But we know an awful lot about honeybees. We know much less about all the other variety of bees. There are over 4,000 species of bees in the United States, 20,000 worldwide. And I'm sure if you really wanted to make a name for yourself, study some unknown bees. You'll find them and you'll get a chance to name them. There's just so many things we don't know about all these other pollinators. And I think honeybees are just that touchstone insect that really allow people to open that door and explore and discover this whole world and the interactions of plants and insects. So, and not to mention the hummingbirds and bats. I mean, bees get all the credit, but there's a lot of things out there spreading pollen from plant to plant.
Oh yeah, and I love that you use that term gateway drug into the pollinator world, because that's the same way I think of them as well. Because yeah, my story's pretty much similar. I mean, as a wildlife biologist, always liking to be out in the woods and stuff, I noticed the other bees, I noticed the butterflies, but they were just kind of background noise almost. And then it was as I was watching my bees on the flowers and trying to figure out what the honeybees were actually using and gathering from stuff, that I was like, oh, wow, that thing is metallic green. I've never seen anything that metallic. And just, wait a minute, that's different. I haven't seen, wait a minute. And kind of doing the same thing as you did, just getting drawn in and sucked in.
Yeah, I think it really sucks you in. I mean, the colors are amazing, all the different adaptations. Nature is just brilliant when it comes to evolving solutions. And so and then the bees that parasitize other bees, it's a crazy world out there. And I think the more we look into it, I mean, fiction just doesn't compare, right? Nature has come up with way weirder, wackier ideas than we can possibly dream up.
Exactly. That's why I love studying nature and science, because we're never going to know it all. And there is always so much more, and so crazy. And even when we think we know something, a lot of times we learn maybe we don't know what we thought we knew.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. I was just putting an article together about how I got into launching this magazine. And I was about to write that giraffes pollinate acacia trees, which is what research had shown in the past. But then, of course, me being a scientist, I go on Google Scholar and I want to confirm my source. And it turns out that in the last 10 years, they've actually shown that the acacia trees mainly get pollinated above the grazing line of the giraffes, and it's done predominantly by bees and solitary insects and not the giraffes. So even things that we think we know that are odd, when we look a little closer, they often appear not to be fully correct.
Yeah, that's a good transition. So why did you start the magazine?
So that's an excellent question. I had previously edited Bee World for the International Bee Research Association. They're based in the UK, and that's also a quarterly magazine. But they were limited to, I think at the time it was 32 pages per issue. And it was put out by an academic publisher, Taylor and Francis. And so there was a lot on article length, and they weren't able to pay authors, that it made it very, very difficult to attract high quality writing for a lay audience, because they were mainly catering to scientists. And then from that, I switched over to editing American Bee Journal for just over a year, which is a job I absolutely loved and adored. My heart is very much with beekeepers. I love the diversity across the spectrum in political thought and approaches, and the amazing creativity of beekeepers. But what I noticed, that online there was starting to be more and more dialogue, especially by the media, pitting beekeepers against native bee enthusiasts. And for me, that's a little bit of a straw man argument. Yes, honeybees, colonies, especially if you drop 100 into an area, do go out and collect a lot of pollen. Honeybees are often referred to as pollen pigs. But the only reason we're having trouble, if that's causing trouble for the native bees, is because we've changed our habitat too much, and there just isn't enough blooming anymore. I think we're much better off aligning the goals of honeybee keepers, because there are so many of them, and it is that touchstone insect that so many people associate with the term bee, and it gives people a window into ecosystem services and protection. And a lot of the goals of beekeepers: reduced pesticides, more clean land, more blooming plants, greater sources of nectar and pollen, understanding how climate change is impacting flowering times, those align perfectly with native bee enthusiasts. And so the reason to launch the magazine was to sort of capture this spirit of people who want to save the bees but not necessarily become beekeepers, as well as galvanize beekeepers to have lots of information they could provide to customers who approach them and say, oh, I hear all the bees are dying, how can I help? And so those little small solutions in our backyards and patios really add up when we can engage enough individuals. And I think that was the goal of the magazine, is to inform, inspire, and entertain. And so we do that visually, we do that through storytelling. I just think beekeepers and native bee enthusiasts, we love in many ways that same diversity. And so I just wanted to reunite them all under one magazine and one roof.
And I love the way you've done that, because I'm like you. I'm like, there's this middle ground in there that we can all get along in, and that really does help everything. And I'm that person that loves everything. So
yeah, and I think it's so easy that once you've already have that affinity for honeybees, it's so easy to broaden that and become a protector of all our flying insects. I've also noticed that in Europe, beekeepers are very, very engaged politically, and they have organized some phenomenal rallies to really change and enact protective laws. And so I think if you combine those groups, why divide us, right? When we have a lot of common goals, we need to learn to work together. Just like in our politics, and I know I shouldn't go into politics, we all need to learn to work together and work across the aisle and find those common goals. And I think that's really what I see the magazine as. It's a platform for discussion. I will print articles that point out where honeybees are problematic. But I always try to give a balanced view, and also, the fact that a lot of people first become aware of problems with pollinators through the loss of honeybees that are reported, I think is very important for galvanizing federal changes in the way we approach landscape development.
yes. And the other thing is that you always stay really positive with your articles and stuff. It's not this gloom and doom, oh my gosh, we're losing everything. There's all, I mean, it's a very positive. Yes, we talk about the issues, but there's also, it's not the, oh, we're done. It's really that very positive tone throughout the whole piece.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to hear that. It's definitely, I get, it's a little bit like dealing with climate change. It can be very gloom and doom. The world is ending. There's nothing we can do. It's beyond, it's so big a problem. There's no way to even approach it. But, and I think you learn this in science, right? Everything can be broken down into smaller questions and smaller changes we can do. And I mean, as somebody said the other day, changing our light bulbs to LED can feel it's an isolating activity. It's something we do in our own home, but we don't really notice how that's having an impact. Whereas when you start gardening in your front yard or your backyard, or you have these conversations, you go to a dinner party and somebody introduces you as a beekeeper, and all of a sudden the conversation stops, right? And they're like, you're a beekeeper? Wait, I've heard the bees are dying. And then they start peppering you with 40 different questions. And they never ask the lawyer, they never ask the dentist, they never ask the hospice nurse. But there's something about that connection with nature that we all crave. And so I think the magazine reflects that. It's what are the solutions, even though the situation is dire, what can we each do? And also I think part of it, and that's why I have the tagline inspire, is when we learn how unique these organisms are and what they are doing, we start to care. And so our goal is really to name the unnamed, because when we associate them with faces and with people and with stories, then it changes our behavior, right? We don't change our behavior because somebody tells us from the top down it's better for the world. We change our behavior because we have an uncle or a niece who's very enthusiastic about a topic and sort of prods us into changing some of our negative habits, like keeping that perfect immaculate lawn, right? And it's these ripple effects that I think are so fascinating, and that's how we improve situations, right? It's through that interpersonal interaction.
So what are some of your favorite things that you've learned from the magazine, or that your favorite experiences with it?
Oh, so one of my favorite ones was actually working with Sarah Dykman. She wrote a piece for my very first issue. She followed the migratory route of monarch butterflies by bicycle, all the way from Mexico up to Canada. And so she's currently writing a book, and she's considering using the title I gave to her article for her book. We called it Miles of Monarchs. And it's just this delightful, it's an individual who fell in love with the monarchs and decided to do something quirky about it. And those types of things they make you go, huh, if life were a little different, I'd get on my own bicycle and do that. But it's probably, I'm never going to actually pull my bike out of the garage and take on a 10,000 mile bike journey. But her enthusiasm is wonderful. I also recently published a piece by a coyote scientist. That's in our autumn issue, and coyotes are very, very important for some of the native fauna in the United States, especially pawpaws and persimmon. And so coyotes will often switch to a fruit diet during the late summer months. And when they do, a lot of that fruit that they consume passed partially undigested, and they leave it in scat in new territories. And so the pawpaw and persimmon seeds actually germinate better after they have passed through the gut of a coyote. And so it's these incredible, unique stories. And then I have a wildlife photographer, Jake Mosher, who wrote an essay for our April issue, and also has one in our autumn issue, where he talks about the connection between nature and the night sky with absolutely stunning photographs. Or my parents were down in Costa Rica, and they met up with a travel guide who is an avid photographer, and put me in touch with him. And I ended up running one of his photos as my April cover of a hummingbird from the cloud forest. So it's these things have a way of falling into my lap. I've learned so much about how to rear butterflies and some of the difficulties in human rearing. And even though it gets people very engaged, sometimes those butterflies have a harder time surviving, or with the history of the monarch tags and how it's really one of the very first big scale citizen science projects and how that has informed so much we know about the journey. So that's the best part of running this magazine. I've always loved learning, and with every issue I get 18 to 20 articles on things I don't always know all that much about, and so then I have to go fact check them and research them and work with communication with the writers, and my writers are just awesome. The magazine would not be what it is without contributors willing to deal with my sometimes weird questions and hopefully good edits, although I'm sure sometimes I destroy their beautiful words as well, and they tolerate that too. So it's definitely a cooperative work.
And it shows that you put a lot of time and passion into it, because it is a good magazine. I mean, I've got a lot of magazines. My magazine subscription number's kind of gone down over the years because I never get around to reading it. There's always something else to do. 2 Million Blossoms, I've read cover to cover every issue except for the fall one, which I am still working on.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. I actually hear that quite a lot, that people will tell me I wasn't going to subscribe, but then an issue found its way in my hand, and this is the only thing I read cover to cover. So we must be doing something right if people are reading it cover to cover. I think one of the funniest emails I ever got was every once in a while the post office will destroy a cover, and so he asked if he could get a clean copy because the post office had shredded his, and he says, I want to keep them, these are heirlooms for my family. So I am officially an heirloom in my first year of publishing.
Nice. Well, besides just doing the magazine, which is obviously a huge job in and of itself, you're a very busy woman. What else are you up to?
Yes, I sometimes wear far too many hats. I am currently the guest host of the Beekeeping Today podcast, where I try to reach out to some of the younger scientists and female beekeepers, and also people involved in different issues of conservation, and add a new voice to that podcast. I'm also a honeybee scientist. So currently I'm in Berlin, Germany, and I'm working in the lab of Tim Landgraf at the Freie Universität. And he invented the bees book tracking system, where you can glue an identifying tag onto the back of each bee, and then you record video of the bees in an observation hive. And using machine learning, you can automatically decode the entire lifetime trajectory of that bee and her interaction partners. And so I'm currently running an experiment to look at the impacts of Varroa, this terrible parasite that feeds on honeybees during development, and what impact that has on colony health. And so I got in a bunch of frames from a commercial beekeeper who had not yet treated because his hives were down in the Black Forest producing honeydew honey. And he brought them back. And so I bought about 10 frames of brood off of them, all about to emerge, and I watched every single bee emerge and whether she emerged with or without a varroa mite, and then she got an appropriate tag. I noted if she had normal wings or crippled wings, and then all of these bees were put into a common garden hive. And what we've found just from the preliminary analysis is that the bees that were parasitized by Varroa end up dying 4 to 5 days sooner than their unparasitized nestmates. And these are bees that are emerging from identical combs, right? So they grew up in the exact same living conditions. The only difference is whether or not there was a Varroa mite in that crib, in that cell that she was developing. So stay tuned. Hopefully that research will continue and we'll have all kinds of insights. I'm also at Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. I fly back in November, and there I'm hoping to get this tracking system established there so that I can use it to look at how pesticides impact colony behavior, sublethal levels of pesticides. When I was at the University of Maryland, I did quite a bit of work to investigate how these small amounts of pesticides that we find in pollen have impacts on both queen losses and brood viability. And so I've actually just submitted a paper today. So fingers crossed that gets accepted. So yes, so I wear an academic hat, I wear the editor founder hat, and sometimes I'm not sure when I sleep, but I love it all, so.
I understand. I wonder the same questions sometimes.
Somehow you make it work, right?
Exactly. When you love what you do, it just happens.
Yeah.
So what's next? Any sneak peeks on what's coming up next year for second year of 2 Million Blossoms?
Yes, so we're revamping the layout and design a little bit, fine tuning it based on some feedback. And then we're also launching in January a new 2 Million Blossoms podcast. So that'll be on all pollinator topics. I'm really excited about that. And then we shall see. I'm looking to add more material to the website. And the long-term goal is to also make some educational videos, but it's always a question of time. We hope to keep producing really awesome content. I'm very excited because we have a photo coming up that'll be on one of our covers eventually of all the pollinators that visit a plant within a 15-minute window. So that's going to be a phenomenal piece. And then, yeah, I mean, people always surprise me. There's a lot of, we have an amazing article coming up on how plants actually kind of trick and drug their pollinator visitors using microbes and caffeine. So yeah, I mean, we tend to think of this relationship between bees and flowers as very benign, but each one of them is looking for certain advantages and they want it at the cheapest price possible. And so if they can do a little sneaking in of things that'll make the bees dance more enthusiastically or come back more regularly, they're not above drugging their visitors.
And it's not just the bees either. There's like with the Jack in the Pulpit. Do you know the story of the Jack in the Pulpits?
I am not that familiar with the Jack in the Pulpit. Do tell.
Ooh, so it's, you know what a Jack in the Pulpit is, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
So it's one of the familiar wildflowers in the spring. Comes up, it's got it's kind of a tube for those that don't know, and then it's got kind of a lid that comes over it. The flower is kind of usually a green or maroonish color, but its main pollinator is a fungus fly.
Huh.
And it has a smell in it that makes the fungus fly think that it's a fungus that it can go and lay its eggs on. And so it tricks the fly into going into it. And the flowers are either male or female.
Mm-hmm.
The fungus fly goes in, it gets down to the bottom and finds there's no fungus. It's been tricked. So it tries to fly up, it hits the lid, falls back in, it tries to climb up the sides of the inside, and they're too slick, so it slides back down. And the whole process, it's getting covered in pollen.
Okay.
Then finally, after it's gotten completely doused and covered in pollen, hopefully, because it's done this a bunch of different times, it finds a little hole on the male flowers. There's a teeny tiny hole at the bottom of the tube, and it'll find that eventually, fly out. Okay, great, it survived. It goes on, it smells another fungus, happens to be, hopefully this time, a female plant, or it could be another male plant, and the same process goes on. But if it's a female plant, female Jack in the Pulpit, then it'll go inside, and the same thing's going to happen. But this time, instead of getting doused in pollen, it's shedding the pollen onto the female parts of the plant, pollinating it. But this time, there's no hole. So it ends up just dying in there if it can't eventually find its way out.
Oh, wow.
And the scientists, the last I read on it, didn't really know why they died in there. I mean, like,
why they don't
if there was an evolutionary advantage, they didn't seem to be getting broken down in there. It seemed to be just a matter of don't escape, more time to pollinate, versus any sort of nutrients that the Jack in the Pulpit might be getting.
Huh, fascinating. Yeah, there's we have an article coming up on an orchid bee, and they actually, when they go into this one blossom, there's only a hole on the bottom again to get out, but it actually traps them in there, smacks these Polonia onto its back, and then holds onto it until the glue dries before releasing it. So it's a video from National Geographic. We've shared it on our Facebook page. It's just incredible to watch.
I missed that video. I need to go back and look at it.
It's brilliant. And the orchid bees are they're like these chunky metallic greens, and they come in other colors as well. And they're just, I mean, they are the original perfumers, right? They go in from blossom to scrape up scents to try and woo the picky and choosy females. So,
well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we wrap this up?
We are on all social media, so if you like pretty pollinator photos, come check us out. And since I think most of your listeners are on the East Coast, we have made available for free a excerpt. It's a 28-page excerpt, 29-page excerpt of our autumn issue that includes the goldenrod article, which is phenomenal because it tells you all these varieties of goldenrod that have no invasive tendencies. A lot of people think, oh, goldenrod, that'll make you sneeze. Nope, that's ragweed. That's not goldenrod at all. And some of these can be absolutely beautiful specimens in your garden, and they feed a huge diversity of pollinators. So the one thing homeowners and gardeners can really do is fill those nectar dearths, and that's especially in the late autumn. So asters and goldenrods are just the ideal plants. We used to have the United States covered in large swaths of them, and I wish we would bring that back.
Oh, yes. And yeah, that's a great article. I've actually recommended it to quite a few different people who were asking me about what goldenrods are good for the garden setting, because I get that question all the time with it. And yeah, a lot of times people are like, no, you can't have any goldenrods. No, there are certain ones that will work in a garden setting. And I love the fact that you've got them all kind of broken down together of different ones that will work. So yeah, I've recommended that often.
Yeah, Nick Dorian comes out of Tufts University, and he's on Twitter as Bee Searcher. I think Bee Searcher, yeah. And he does a lovely job. He's done some really fun articles. He always surprises me. I loved his goldenrod one. He also did one on getting out to the East Coast to track hoverflies, the mysterious swarms of hoverflies that have disappeared but used to be quite frequent. And so yes, he's a hoot. And he's doing some great work for research.
Yeah, the hoverfly one was another one I really enjoyed. Just like you said, he's got some great articles that you've published.
Yeah, you'll have to line him up on the show. I will pass you his contact information.
Thanks. Yes, always looking for new people to have on the show.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, and I'll have links to 2 Million Blossoms in the show notes. And if people have questions and want to contact you directly, how should they do that?
Yes, so you can send me an email at kirsten@2millionblossoms.com, or check us out on Facebook. Like our page, follow us on social media. I try to answer all emails, but I often get inundated with over 100 a day. So if it's very important and it has gotten lost in my inbox, just hit me up again. I won't be offended. It's the nature of you put out the most critical burning fires at a time. So
understandable. Yep, I do the same thing. Well, thanks so much for chatting with us today. Like you said, it's been fun. I always enjoy chatting with you. So thanks a lot, and have a great day.
The one other thing I was going to say, how about we give your listeners a discount, and can you include the discount code in your show notes, and then that'll give them $5 off if they want to subscribe.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye. Thanks again to Kirsten for taking time out of her busy schedule to talk with us. I really enjoyed our conversation and hope you did too. If you couldn't tell, I am a huge fan of 2 Million Blossoms, and I encourage everyone to check it out. I think many of you will enjoy the magazine as much as I do. If you do decide to subscribe, don't forget to check the show notes for that discount code that Kirsten so generously offered us. Before I wrap this up, I wanted to ask you to please tell someone else about the podcast. And until next week, I encourage you to take some time to enjoy the nature in your own yards and community.